Call this meeting of the School District 72 Board of Education to order. The meeting until September 27, 2022. We'll move up right to the chairperson's remarks. So, good evening. I acknowledge on behalf of the Board of Trustees that this meeting is being held on the traditional territory of the Liquidaw people. I'm John Kerr, chairperson of the School District 72 Board of Education. In attendance this evening are Vice Chair Pat Eddy, trustees Susan Wilson, Joyce McMahon, Shannon Briggs, Richard Franklin, and Daryl Hagan. Also in attendance are Superintendent Dr. Jeremy Morrow, Associate Superintendents Morgan Kyle and Phil Sidnick, as well as Secretary Treasurer Kevin Patrick. Present also are Natalie Crawshaw, Executive Assistant to the Superintendent and Secretary Treasurer, Jennifer Patrick, Manager of Communications, and providing technical support is Clayton Hansen, Manager of Information Technology. Please note that there is a 1 to 3 minute production delay between the live event that you are viewing and meeting participants. The question and answer function is open for questions on the agenda items for this meeting. Questions that are posed during the meeting will be addressed at the end of the session. There are several topics that I intend to address this evening, so my remarks will be slightly longer than usual this evening. September's been a busy month for trustees. On September 9th, I, along with trustees Wilson, Eddy, and Franklin, traveled to Surge Narrows School to take part in the opening ceremony for the community's outdoor meeting place. The children at the school will be able to use this covered space as a place for outdoor learning. The district contributed the space for this structure, which will be a real asset for the school and the community for years to come. This is a great example of what can be done when the community and the district cooperate to achieve a goal that benefits both the learning opportunities for our students and creates a facility that community groups can use as well. Bonus for the trip was the opportunity to see several groups of humpback whales and a group of sea lions. My thanks go to Laurel Vining, principal of Quadra and Surge Narrows Schools, for arranging the trip and for piloting the Zodiac to and from Surge Narrows School. Laurel, in addition to her work as a school principal, is also a talented pilot and whale watching guide. Last Thursday evening, the district held a recognition dinner for this year's group of employees who have decided to leave the world of work to join the leisure class. 26 people retired, with 11 attending the event. Those who have retired almost universally noted how meaningful and fulfilling that their careers working with and for the students of the district has been to them. It says a great deal about the quality of the people who work in this district when they can look back on a lifetime of working in schools with fond memories. Our students are fortunate to have had their support during their school careers, and I wish them happiness and fulfillment in this new phase of their lives. On Sunday, I briefly attended the CUPE Local 723 picnic and had the opportunity to speak to some of the members who attended. Special thanks to Andrea Craddock, Local 723 President, for the invitation to attend this event. Later that day, I attended the festival at Haig Brown House and joined Steve Woods, Project Manager, and Vice Chair Eddy in accepting the City of Campbell River's Environmental Stewardship Award in recognition of the district's efforts to reduce SD72's water and energy consumption and carbon emissions. And this is the award that was presented on Sunday. So we'll have it up in the trophy case after my remarks. But says 2022 Stewardship Awards program recognizes School District 72 for dedication to water energy conservation initiatives and action in Campbell River, September 25, 2022. Thank you for your environmental commitment. So it's a nice recognition of the work that's been done over the past several years. I would like to recognize the efforts of Steve Woods, District Project Manager, over the years to upgrade district facilities to be more energy efficient and to reduce carbon emissions, also water consumption. Due to his efforts, the district has reached its original targets for reductions for 4 years earlier than planned. His work has not only been environmentally beneficial, but it has also saved the district money in these times of tight budgets. Thank you, Steve, for your efforts over the years to make School District 72 a leader in environmental responsibility. On another topic, as I have pointed out in my chairperson's remarks numerous times over the past 2 years, School District 72 continues to face budget challenges due to chronic underfunding by the provincial government. School District 72 reserves have been drawn down to balance the budget this year, according to directions from the Ministry of Education. But the district faces a structural deficit of approximately $700,000 that will need to be addressed going forward. The board has been advocating to both the Ministry of Education and the BC School Trustees Association for the government to address this long-term problem that districts throughout the province continue to face. The fact that many districts face deficit budgets primarily due to expenses to address the ongoing unfunded costs associated with COVID-19 and the increased costs that high inflation has imposed on school districts' operational budgets this year, unless they made service cuts to students, should be an indication that the public education system continues to be underfunded and has been for more than 20 years. This is unsustainable, and the Ministries of Education and Finance must deal with this ongoing problem. Over the past years that I've been on this board, the district has had as its highest priority in its capital budget request the replacement of Cedar Elementary. Despite repeated requests and a lobbying effort that saw support from many community groups and several meetings with 3 education ministers going back at least 6 years about the school's replacement, there has been no positive response from the Ministries of Education or Finance to this point. I hope that the incoming board will continue to see this as a priority and to continue to work to have this school replaced. It appears that the contract framework for the British Columbia General Employees Union will be the basis for a contract settlement with the Canadian Union of Public Employees and the BC Teachers Federation. At present, it is likely that the contract will be reached with no disruptions to student learning, and that's a positive thing. Friday, September 30th, is the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation. This is now a statutory holiday, and schools will not be in session in acknowledgement of this important day. Schools have an invitation from Electorate Family Life and KDC Health to take part in the annual walk and events planned for the day. The event will be held at Spirit Square, and after the opening, a walk will take place. Further events will occur after the walk. Further information is available on the Electorate Family Life website. I should also mention that the event begins at 11 o'clock on Friday morning. Finally, the first month of school is almost done, and by all accounts, the beginning of the new school year has been a success. I would like to offer my thanks to the staff of the district, including maintenance workers, education assistants, school executive assistants, bus drivers, teachers, and school administrators for all their work to prepare our schools to welcome our students back for the new year. Also, thanks to the senior management team for their efforts to ensure that all the pieces were in place for a successful opening. My hope is that this year will see a more normal year with no significant disruptions to our students' learning. Thus ended the lesson. Thank you. Okay, we will move on then to the second item, which will be the superintendent's remarks.
Well, thank you very much, Chair Kerr, and I will echo some of your sentiments after that very thorough update. But I wanted to start by just sharing that yesterday I had the privilege of traveling and spending the day at the Cortes Island School. It was a wonderful day. I always appreciate being there and just to have the opportunity to talk with those committed educators who are part of an amazing school. But I wanted to share the highlight of that trip, which was actually meeting all of the students who are part of the Cortes Island Academy. It's its inaugural high school offering on Cortes Island. We had 20 students there yesterday who have come from all over and already have developed into this wonderful learning community. Maybe my timing could have been a little bit better because we started with this group in a circle, and what I wasn't quite prepared for was their morning routine was actually a dance circle. So each person does a dance move and then everybody does it just kind of as a warm up. So I had to think on my feet and do a dance move, but without injuring any of the students on either side of it. So I was happy to pull that off. But they also shared in that circle as we went around both their name, but also something that they really appreciated about the program. And we so often it was comments like, I love everything. I love the people in the program. I love the facilitators. I love the adventure. So they just really highlighted belonging, learning, agency, the opportunity to make choices about their learning, and just how different it feels than some of the traditional schooling that they've been part of. So it was just wonderful to hear, and that affirmation of, again, and you mentioned it with the pavilion, but that opportunity to work differently, uniquely, and creatively with community to promote and enhance new opportunities for youth. And it's a huge piece for some families on island that are, and I felt this waiting in the ferry lineup, and I watched the bus come, but then I watched another bus come to Quatiaska Cove and drop off students. And they had their bags and they had their kit that they'd gone home, but are coming over for their week of schooling, which included which they're actually right now at Carrington Bay having a 2-night camp out. So just seeing kids commuting to Cortez for schooling, but that also meant that there's a number of Cortez families whose children are able to stay at home on island and receive high school credits. So it's an exciting piece, and obviously growing pains with the program and working through some of the pieces around it, but just really grateful to have experienced that. And it just highlights again, there's a small remote school that operates a little differently because of its distance from town. And that intersection of community and the school district, which we saw so evident when I was fortunate enough to accompany Chair Kerr, Vice Chair Eddy, and Trustees Wilson and Franklin to Reed Island to see again that blend of community and school in action. And what a beautiful day that we had to celebrate that partnership between school and community. You didn't get the same opportunity that I had yesterday to have that same experience with school and community, but that's why I'm here to share it, because it was really, really special. And I think it's important to acknowledge that this is possible because of the incredible advocacy, grant writing, and support of some people on Cortez Island. And we'll hopefully have a more formal presentation of that and have some of those key people present to the next board. I will just echo Chair Kerr that we have had a relatively smooth September startup. And that we are optimistic that as our final numbers for our student counts tabulate over the next couple of days, that we do anticipate being just slightly above our projected spring numbers. So that's a positive trend. I do also want to thank and acknowledge our parents and community who had to make some last-minute adjustments due to the unforeseen closure of schools earlier this month, acknowledging the Queen's passing and the closure of schools on that day. I think it's important to acknowledge that holiday and the late announcement of it put a lot of strain on families, and we just wanted to know that we saw that and appreciate your partnering with us on that late announcement. I will just echo as well just the sweetness of the retirement celebration of being back together again in person. And while we were creative and uniquely responding to the events of the pandemic, there is, and maybe there's an additional sweetness because of that delay, but to be back together in person, celebrating the accomplishments and reflecting on the joy and the laughter and the stories that were reflective of the contributions that people had made in our organization. And it's great. And I want to acknowledge that whether they were at the school board office, whether they were a school-based principal, whether they were a custodian, whether they were a bus driver or an admin assistant or an educational assistant, every single one knew what the core purpose of our district was, which is changing life trajectories for kids. And that was just so evident. And I think the other piece that's wonderful is the camaraderie and collegiality that they've established with colleagues in that work and the importance of that network and support. I also wanted to acknowledge Diana Cameron for making sure that the occasion of Timberline Secondary's 25th anniversary was noted, and also to acknowledge that Dr. Kevin Elder, the original first founding principal of that school, made the trip up from Saanich to address some students and the alumni who were there. And then lastly, I just want to acknowledge that while Friday is a day dedicated and set aside for truth and reconciliation, that we fundamentally recognize that in our district, this is our daily work. And we're deeply committed to ensuring that we're taking action to support reconciliation each and every day. And I want to just share, I think Trustee will share some specifics around some initiatives, but all week, our students, our schools, and even our district sites are engaged in meaningful and active learning to acknowledge the importance of truth and reconciliation. So I just wanted to share, we recognize the insufficiency of a day, the day calls attention to it, but it is our daily work. And so I'll finish with that.
Thank you, Superintendent Morrow. I do apologize for my omission of your attendance at that event.
Oh, no, I didn't notice that. You missed that.
Okay. The next item is the approval of the minutes of the meeting of September 6th, 2022. The suggested motion is that the minutes of the meeting of September 6th, 2022 are hereby approved as circulated. Can I have a motion? Trustee Franklin, seconded by Trustee Hagan. All those in favor? Okay, the motion is carried. Is there any business arising from the minutes? Okay. Hearing none. Additions or alterations to the agenda? Okay, Trustee, sorry, Vice Chair Eddie.
I'd like to add, and under any other business, honoring of September 30th by Indigenous Education Department.
Okay. Thank you. Great. So we'll move then to, are there any other additions or alterations? All right, we'll move to approval of the agenda. The suggested motion is that the agenda is hereby approved as amended. Trustee McMahon, Trustee Eddy. Okay, all those in favor? Motion is carried. And so we'll move to reported board decisions from the September 27th confidential board meeting, and that'll be Vice Chair Eddy.
So in the confidential meeting this evening, we discussed matters of legal and staffing. We have not gotten to the end of our agenda, and we will be returning after this meeting to finish it up.
Thank you. There is no correspondence, no public agenda or education submissions. So we will move on to our elected board matters, and the first item under that will be the presentation of the audited financial statement for the year ending June 30, 2022. That's yes, both of you. Okay, Secretary Treasurer Patrick and Mr. Corey Vanderhorst from MNP LLC.
So yeah, I'd like to introduce Corey Vanderhorst. He is a partner with MNP. He is our chief auditor. And really met the team. I know you had some really good people working for you that were here on site working on the audits and gathering it all together. So we'll just pass it over to Corey right now. I am going to bring up some financial statements and I will be trying to scroll through. So if you kind of keep an eye on that and let me know where we can be, so that the individuals and teams.
Yeah, yes. Start on the statement 2.
Okay.
Thank you for the introduction. Chief Auditor, that's a good title. And thank you to the Board of Education and staff for being here to speak tonight. So as we do every September, we've got a little bit set up things to look at. Looking at the last school year, and perfect. So I will take you through some of the highlights. Start off with a big thank you to Kevin and his team and staff throughout the district. It's not just the finance department that we're talking to other departments as well. So I'm starting with the income statement or the statement of operations. I like to start here and look at what happened throughout the last school year. Before I talk about numbers, just to tell you that this is the final step tonight to present the financials. We are happy to be providing essentially a clean audit opinion. The Ministry of Education requires you to prepare your statements a certain way in accordance with some Treasury Board regulations, and these have been prepared in accordance with those regulations. The clean opinion. Starting from the top then, so funding and revenues, you can see an increase there from 73.6 to 74.5 million. Of course, the 2021 numbers had started the pandemic and a bunch of changes to the year. 2022 is a full year of operations under the pandemic, but you did see that bounce back in tuition revenue. So that's one of the more significant changes there, from 436 to 925. Ministry funding was down a little bit, but there was some additional pandemic funding in 2021. But overall, $74.5 million. On the expenses side, as you'd expect, it was mentioned earlier of, increases in inflation. You would have increases for, instruction and then salaries and wages to teachers and staff. So total expenses of 76.9 million, which gives you an accounting deficit for the year, of $2.4 million. Now I say accounting deficit because we are doing all sorts of adjustments with capital projects, with amortization. So what I'd like to look at next, and if you can scroll to statement 5. So this is the statement of cash flows. This is more how you're thinking when you look at the budget. You're looking at the cash that's going to be coming in and the profits you're going to be doing. This unwinds a bit of the accounting adjustment. The first important number is that total operating transactions number 1,132,930. So that's the first subtotal. That's the net cash outflow for the year from operations at the school district. Then you get $2.4 million in capital project spending. You can see, so $2,080,000 of purchased capital assets. There's an additional $247,000 of projects that were on the go at June 30th, not yet finalized. That's pretty normal as you're coming into the summer months. Facilities is kicking up some of their projects and things. And then financing transactions. So how do you fund $2.4 million of capital projects? There was $6 million of capital revenue or funding received. And as you can see, with only 2.4 spent, there are monies rolling forward into the current school year to be spent on some of those capital projects that either happen through the summer or are continuing. The main bank accounts, the general bank account of the school district, had a net cash inflow of $2.6 million. The last page that I'll take you through, and we can scroll back to statement 1, is we'll look at the balance sheet. So this is a snapshot of what's in the accounts at June 30th. You can see the district has had $20.4 million of cash and cash equivalents, again, up $2.5 million from the prior year. There are always some receivables coming in from the ministry and various other organizations that you work with. You can see the $480,000 from the ministry and from your First Nations under the local education agreements and other agreements, a small amount coming in there. So total financial assets, cash and receivables of $21.1 million. Then we look at the liabilities. You always have some payables right at the end of the year, or at the end of the school year, I should say. So $9 million. The change there year over year, really just timing of when some of those invoices and things would come in. Unearned revenue is tuition for the current school year. So that increase there represents increased tuition, increased student enrollment, for example, international students that are coming into the current school year. There's another $1.2 million of funding put aside for current year projects. And then we get this deferred capital revenue number. This is a really big number, $65 million. This represents two things. One, it's all the capital projects in the past. This is the one way that the ministry wants the financial statements full of. And that number is about 59 million of that number. And then there is another $6 million of funding rolling forward to the current year. Employee future benefits is a number that an actuary, the province hires an actuary, and they calculate the long-term sick and severance accruals for all the staff at the district. So you get a total liability number of 78.1. And then you get this net debt number. But I mentioned that in that deferred capital revenue, there's $59 million of money that has been spent in the past. So when you look at the net debt of 56.9, to unwind that $59 million number, think of it actually as a net financial asset position of about $2 or $3 million, a positive figure. It's only showing as net debt because of the way the Treasury Board regulation is requiring the statements to look. So it's a big scary number. The reality is it's not that big scary net debt number. It's actually a positive around $3 million. After that, we get the last few numbers here. The non-financial assets are the tangible capital assets. So the buildings, equipment, buses, all the physical assets, $80 million. What you see there is it was $82 million last year. You spent about $2.5 million. But then we depreciate those assets over time, draw down the value, and the depreciation was about $4 million. So at the end, we had a net $2 million decrease there. And the bottom number is the accumulated surplus, 23.3 million. Important to note, that's not a cash number. As you can see, the cash at the top is $20 million. In that accumulated surplus number, there's a roughly $15 million of what we call equity in the capital assets. So the value of the assets minus that deferred capital. So important to realize that that $23 million is not a cash number, it's an accountant's number. So I'll pause there. That's a really big run through on the financials, but I'm happy to answer any questions or cycle back through any of the pages that we just looked at.
Also, at a level, talk about the restatement.
Yes, thank you, Kevin. And so you see on the 2021 column, it says restated note 21 in a few spots. What happened this year is in prior years, and this is by ministry directive, when you're amortizing the capital assets, you used to purchase the assets and not start that depreciation until year 2. So you have an asset, if you bought it in July, for example, you'd have a whole year would go by before you would start depreciating it. Excuse me. So the ministry has changed the policy and asked all school districts across the province to start using something called the half-year rule. No matter what time you buy an asset during the year, you'll take half a year of depreciation on it. So what we had to do was restate last year and put in the adjustment to the capital assets. So it's an accounting adjustment, not actually real. The depreciation of capital assets is always an estimate. We're trying to say how long is an asset gonna last and try and wind it down to 0 at the end of the life. So we expense a little bit of it every year. And that restatement you'll see pops up all over the place. And if you're to go pull any of your neighboring financial statements when they hit the web for up and down the avenue, they will all have that restated comment and adjustments in some of the back schedules to change the depreciation and the way the depreciation is calculated.
Okay, sorry.
Sorry,
Other
John.
questions?
I have a question about the half-year depreciation. So that's not a generally accepted accounting principle across public sectors. It's just the Ministry of Education. Joe?
It's the Minister of Education. It is a process or a method used for taxes. So when file, if you are a profit-based business, when you file taxes, CRA uses the half-year rule, so it's deemed to be an acceptable way. In some of our other, if you were to go to the city or to North Island College or any of the other organizations that would use the same public sector standards, they are either doing the month that they purchased it or they're using the half-year. That's sort of the accepted methods. Some organizations might go right to the day that they purchase it. That's a lot more work for the finance department to make those calculations. They end up with big massive spreadsheets, and I'll count those spreadsheets, but that's a lot of work. So the half-year rule is designed to balance off the cost benefit of the amount of tracking that the finance and the rest of the staff have to do.
Thank you.
Any questions? We have it's part of a two-part question. When you talk about capital assets, are we talking about the buildings? The major things would be the buildings, but does it include buildings or does it include buildings and land?
So building and land, yeah. In fact, in this note 11, you would see a breakdown between the main categories there. So land, buildings, equipment, and then maybe 2 or 3 other categories.
So the second part of my question then is, can you break that down to find out the asset value of individual properties? Like if you want to find out the asset value of Georgia Park or Sandown or Cedar, could you break that down into the land is worth this much, the building is worth this much? Is that something you could do and something that we could find out?
Yeah, and I'll defer to Kevin in a second, but yeah, essentially, yes, there's large tracking spreadsheets. One thing that I'll note is that it's the historic cost of those properties. So if any of the properties was purchased 40 years ago, it's a lot different than what that land we work now. So that's the one, sort of caveat here, that $80 million, if you had to do a replacement, heaven forbid you had to do this, if you had to replace everything, it's probably 5 to 10 times that to replace everything.
So to follow on, if a school was built 30 years ago, school, not the land itself, but the school was built 30 years ago, and a school was built 10 years ago, or 5 years ago, would you look at the value of the school at the time it was completed? Both schools at the time they were completed, so the 30-year-old school, would it cost less, so it's worth less? The depreciation?
Yeah, it will be less, 2 reasons. One, that yes, it costs less because of, inflation, the inflation difference between those 2 projects, construction projects. The other thing is the older one will have been depreciated for more years. So it'll be on the books for a lot smaller value than the newer school.
Thank you. Are there other questions? Okay.
The most questions we've had for an auditor.
I think they're good questions. I like questions.
Oh, thank you. So, the next item, have you just covered both the financial statement discussion and analysis?
No, so this was Corey's part here to present. So Corey is the new partner. I don't know for many of our board. Mark Piercy was the previous partner for like generations.
Yeah.
Really through generations through his father. And he had retired a couple of years ago. And so Corey will be our audit partner moving forward. So.
Thank you. I really appreciate the clarity of your presentation. Sometimes I have a hard time understanding, and even though I was on the audit committee for 4 years, I still have great difficulty with the product.
Yes.
With the idea of materiality. Yeah. Anyway, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay, so yeah, I've got a series of follow-ups to this. So before we leave this, I have to thank, and I must thank Renee McNeil for preparation of these financial statements. So as everybody hits a busy year, she has also had a busy year. But when everybody heads off, that's when her work begins for this. And her and her staff worked really hard through the months of July and heading right into August preparing these statements. As you can tell from the amounts, tens of thousands of transactions. Her staff make sure that everything gets paid on time and is coded correctly. And she goes through and organizes it, builds up the statements to give us this. So it's a really big project. And it culminates in this. And then as of today, we're back into the next school year. So definitely a huge appreciation for her. And then as I kind of get into the next presentation, talk a little bit about our financial performance last year. She's also done a really good job of looking at budgets and setting budgets so that every department can look at them really closely. You'll see our budget, our financial position is getting a lot tighter than it used to be. And so we're really going to be asking of all staff to be looking at budgets, tracking budgets, and making sure that things fit within those budgets. So, and she's done a lot of work getting those aligned to make it easier for the users or staff to be able to follow. So again, thank you to her. So I am going to also then go through the financial statement discussion analysis. It is in your binder. I am going to put it up just so through Teams people can see it. So I'll try to be back and forth. Can't hear me? Let me know. So financial statement discussion and analysis is my attempt at trying to describe some of the financial statement activity that in a non-finance way. So give me and Corey financial statements, and we could talk for days just about the technical details in there. But the whole reason we produce these financial statements are for the public, for the users, for the government. And so but it's really difficult looking at our financial statements to gather that information. You almost need a finance background in order to interpret. So the financial statement discussion and analysis, it kind of goes through some of the narrative about maybe what you're looking at. So a lot of the numbers in it have been pulled directly out of the statements. And I'm not going to go and read through the full. The reason it's in writing, it gets posted on the website, is so that people can go take a look at it and read through it and at their own pace. And of course, any questions, anytime are always welcome. As I was happy to hear Corey got some questions, because we do, it is our area of expertise, and we do like engagement when it comes to finance. Okay, so I will bring it up. Might be a little tricky to do. So I have been. Oh, this is interesting. So I have been mentioning that it's been a tight financial year for us. We have drawn down our deficit from $4.6 million down to $2.2 million. Yes, our surplus. So we've drawn down our surplus from 4.6 down to 2.2. Now, we had actually budgeted for that. And the concern isn't overspending this financial year. There's still, I have to highlight that the concern came back in January, February of last year, when we started to point out that costs had started to escalate and we had to make decisions. So we actually budgeted a deficit of 3.57 million, and we came at 2.4. But at this time last year, we had a planned deficit of $600,000 on the operating deficit, and we had to increase the operating portion of that deficit up to $2.2 million. And that was due to the sick replacement costs. I'll touch a little bit, you'll be able to see some of that. Inflation was like a $600,000 increase that we had to, and there's also a little bit of discretionary spending that was above where it should be as well, which I'll point out. So we can kind of see that big surplus that we had for years, that the Ministry of Ed has really told the board you need to spend down. It's getting spent down very, very quickly. On the next, here's a little chart. So I believe that 6.4 is when the minister came and sat at this table and said, "You've got lots of money to spend." And you can see that we had planned to spend, the board's surplus policy plans to spend down, but it went from a reasonable and it started to accelerate up to a $2.4 million draw on surplus last year. So now with that $2.1 million that's left, only about $1 million of that's available. And it really is getting to a critical point. I just mentioned to you that we started at $600,000, and mid-year we had to increase that operating deficit to 2.2. 2.1 is left. So what happened last year? If the same situation occurs this year, we'd have to make mid-year cuts and reductions to try to balance that budget. But even at that $2.1 million, I'll show you a schedule reserve slightly later. We did look at one last week. There's really only $1 million that is available to try to cover that. So we're definitely in a challenging spot, and we have a structural deficit. This year's budget was balanced with $350,000 borrowed from benefits, $150,000 borrowed from the international program, and we have some unfunded wages that come every single year that need to be supported. And this really just kind of describes a lot of that in more detail. And I don't know how this is going to work. It's
Kevin, what is our operational deficit for next or for this year, as far as we know?
so our structural deficit is to use 700,000 is on the lower end, on the conservative end. but it's between 700 to up. Now, this fiscal year, we have actually balanced the budget because we borrowed money from the benefits. And
Right. So next year, if we continue the way we're continuing, there'll be another $700,000 that comes out of our system.
Yeah.
Is that what you're saying?
That's exactly what we're saying. And I've mentioned previously, it's a continuous message, because inflation is not funded, the only way to get ahead of that is through enrollment growth. And unfortunately, I don't feel that our 20 to 30 FTE increase above our expectations will do it. It'll help, but it won't do it. So we're in that challenging stuff. So this is kind of where we get into some of the details of the nuts and bolts, and it's probably a little easier to read it through the financial statement discussion and analysis rather than looking at the big set of financial statements. But within this, so through the transparency, I do want to point out a couple of things. So one of the things under tuition, the international program actually exceeded the budget. So that was a bright spot. Our international program has bounced back and exceeded prior enrollment. And it continues to have a really robust, it was a quick bounce back from the COVID years that definitely had. So that was a positive $182,000 for us. Investment income, we're starting to see it bounced back up. We had budgeted 95 and as interest rates start to go up, I know it definitely has its impact on the economy, but we do get a benefit from some of that.
But I just have one more question. So what are we doing now to get rid of the structural deficit? And I know we can't tell what inflation's gonna be. And we don't know what the government's actually gonna give us, you know, for any of that, but are we doing things now to help slow the pace of the structural deficit?
So the structural deficit won't be addressed and dealt with until we get to the budget point. Part of the message that I'm delivering right now is to let everybody know in the system know that really we've got to be very conservative with expenses and expending. We have to try to stay within budgets, possibly maybe even slightly under budget would be great. So we haven't actually addressed that $700,000 yet. So again, looking at more details. So we had budgeted that $2.1 million operating deficit. Most years we typically will come in less than that, like 600,000. This year we landed right on top of it. And so kind of looking at some of these things, you can see that like employee benefits was under by $289,000, but other professionals were over by $218,000. And the $218,000 in other professionals, that was over by that amount, and it wasn't budgeted because of some of the turnover that we experienced. We had brought in director of HR. The HR left, we brought in somebody intern to replace, and then we brought on a new hire. So with some of that transition, it definitely led to additional costs. Teachers teaching on call. So this $1.9 million, it used to be it used to be just under $1 million at $900,000. So we did boost it. The actual expenses came in at $600,000 above the million, so 1.6. But some of that was sick costs, and some of the sick costs that we asked for that inflationary were actually captured in other spots. So support staff, casual sick replacement was actually in the support staff column. Educational assistance, it was actually in with educational assistance. So even though that TTOC amount looks like it's under budget, some of the planned sick coverage is actually spread amongst different accounts there. And then the last thing, and these are the things that unfortunately we just can't quite control, and this is why that $1 million is important, is we had budgeted this sheet. We had budgeted utilities at $1.4 million and utility costs came in at $1.65 million. Colder year with COVID, we put in MERV 13 filters that require extra energy in order to run them. So how much, we don't know. And with each system, it's slightly different. So we didn't have that in the budget. It did go over. So those are some of the challenges that we're facing. So I think that's it for the financial performance. You know, overall, it's good that we came in on budget and didn't go over, but some of that was sort of the aggressive budget increases that we had identified earlier in the year. We used 95% of the emergency contingency, slowly starting to rebuild that. And we had to use a lot of the unreserved surplus.
Yeah, so the surplus that we have right now, if let's say we had to pay for business on our own with the surplus that we have, how many days would that last? We got 1 million,
Days, well, we're probably down to like half a month.
all right.
So that is the financial statement discussion analysis. It is online. You can ask Renee or I questions after if you do have other. But we have some good.
I just have a question about some of the capital improvement funding. So I know that when we apply for capital improvement funding, we're applying like a year ahead for capital improvements the year following. With inflationary costs, there's a very real possibility that we'll be over budget when we go to actually build before we've even started. So, and I know that the government probably won't fund that, but can you redirect that funding? So if we had 2 projects on the go or 3 projects on the go, one is for sure gonna come in over budget because the hard materials have gone up. Can you apply to have that funding moved over to cover the 2 other projects? Like, can you, is there a way to do that?
The number one way that the ministry supports inflation is we are applying for funding a year and a half ahead of time based on our estimates. And so what we'll have to do is we'll typically have to scale back the project is the first option. Because every project's kind of going over, they won't allow us to just cancel that project and take that money and use it elsewhere. So in our financial statement, you'll see Perry High Phase 4 mechanical. It was a multi-million-dollar capital improvement broken into 4 phases. But even within those 4 phases, we had to shift stuff around in order to cover the inflation. So it definitely provides a huge challenge. The ministry is aware. Occasionally, they will reach out and ask for an inflationary increase to the estimate, but it is rare. You know, it's there have been many years and like decades where we actually didn't get this type of funding. So this funding is important. We use it as effectively as we can. We spend it as quick as we can to make sure we capture or we avoid some of those inflationary pressures. And ultimately, it leads to lower repairs and maintenance and utility costs. So so we are thankful for that funding, and we do have a way of managing it, but it really is doing less with the same amount.
Thank you.
No. So just one, I guess, a bit of a question, but I kind of addressed it in my remarks, but it seems that a large part of our deficit comes from the government's refusal to fund for certain things like inflation, administrative salary increases, COVID, some of the COVID expenses we had. Those are things that you have to deal with, but the government does not fund for the extra costs. So we have to find that money, and we've used our reserve, pretty well used our reserves up to cover a lot of that stuff. Now we're at the place where we have minimal reserves. So as you said earlier, that there's going to have to be some real hard choices to be made in the future unless the government changes the way they do things.
It's really difficult looking at financial statements to see where some of those cost pressures are. As I mentioned before, Renee's done a fabulous job with budgets. And really, I would say this year she nailed the budgets because what our expenses were kind of hit right on. When you see some of those cost escalations, as we know about them mid-year, we will adjust the budget. So you'll hear more about that in February than you do right now. With cost escalation, on one case, you could see at this point, we've escalated 600 grand and we'd be 600 grand over planned spending, but we haven't, we've hit it. So yeah, financial statements usually isn't where some of that will show up. It's usually in the budget where we show some of that.
Trustee Hagan?
I'm just wondering what our budget for snow removal is and those kinds of things. We must have a fixed budget on that as well. Like if we have a really tough winter, that could just push everything right out of, very out of scale.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's so many unknown factors out there. I'm just looking at the price of gasoline going up and we're in this world of flux and inflation. You just go down and buy some food and that kind of stuff. Everyone's prices are going up and wages are just skyrocketing. I'm building a house right now and I can't believe how much I have to pay my workers and they're competing with our staff and it's just a tough job you've got. I want to thank you and your team from my whole heart on trying to get this budget under control in unknown factors. It's like a minefield out there. Like anything could go wrong and we're so close to the edge now. And you're doing a great job in managing all that. And I want to acknowledge you and your team for the fantastic job you're doing. So I can understand it now after all the years of being on the board and I can follow it right through. And I know what you're saying, but there's still so many unknown factors out there. And you seem to be tight on the reins, You're not gonna let this become a runaway, but we really need to all work together, trustees especially, in lobbying the government for more substantial, consistent financing. And I'd like to see that made as a priority for this present government to say education comes first. So, we're struggling.
Thank you, Trustee Hagan. I would like to thank you and your team for the work that you've done on this and also for the clarity with which you present the information. I think this year for me has been the easiest to understand the financial statements where we have been and where we're going. Thank you again very much. Pass on our thanks, the board's thanks to your team.
Welcome. And when we get into 12C, I would like to present something before the proceeding policy.
We will move to 12C right now.
Okay.
So the audit committee.
If we could, I would like to just point something out before the audit committee has a chance to speak.
Okay.
So because there is a change, the audit committee will be recommending acceptance of a schedule of reserves along with approval of the financial statements, I hope. But when we were going through our year-end reporting, it came to our attention that there was actually a change in the information that we presented to the board last time. So as a board, you approved the reserves as they were at that time, but there is a change. So when you approve the statements today, you will be approving this new transfer of reserves. So I want to just show what the change was. On the Indigenous program, Indigenous funds are targeted. It's in the School Act that those funds should only be spent on Indigenous programs. And so of all the other items that are on there, it really is only that should be targeted. Now, what we did have is we had a revenue item of over $2 million, and the actual targeted funds were $1.9 million. So what that has done is it has reduced the targeted for the Indigenous down to 128,000. And then we have increased the emergency contingency with that difference. So the bottom line hasn't changed. $2.185 million is what is in the reserves. This is updated in the financial statements and the notes that Corey presented tonight, and that we will ask the board. So I just thought I'd point that out too.
Thank you. So the suggested motion is that the audited financial statement for the term ending June 30, 2022, which includes the reserve transfers, be adopted as presented by Auditor Corey Vanderhorst from the firm of MNP LLP. We have a mover for that. Okay, trustee Hagan, trustee Franklin. Would anyone from the audit committee like to speak to this further?
No, that was the motion that we planned to put forward
Okay,
on behalf of the audit committee.
thank you very much. Okay, so there's a motion on the floor. It's moved and seconded. So all those in favor of the motion? Okay, the motion is carried. And we will then move on to the next item, which will be the audit committee's recommendation on the extension of the auditor's contract. The suggested motion is that the board recommends the extension of the auditor MNP LLP's contract for an additional term, moved by. Sorry? Do they? Okay, so audit committee would move that, make that motion. and-
Yeah, on
That's
behalf of the
fine.
audit committee, we would like to move that the board recommends the extension of the auditor MNP LLP's contract for an additional term.
And do we have somebody on the audit committee to second it? Trustee, sorry, trustee Briggs. Okay, discussion,
What was the term on the contract?
the additional term, which I would imagine
One
is a year.
One
right?
year.
This is just the annual.
Yeah. Further discussion? All those in favor of the motion? Okay, the motion is carried. Thank you to the audit committee. I know that having said that, there's a lot of work, and for people who aren't immersed in financial statements and stuff, sometimes it's really steep learning curve to try to understand what's going on, but Kevin and the auditors are usually pretty good at keeping people.
Yeah,
Helping people
it's
understand.
obvious to us that the work is done far away from us, but we have to struggle to try and understand it.
Thank you. Okay, so that motion is passed, so we're gonna move on to next item. And we don't have any education or business initiatives. Sorry,
This 12E.
oh, I'm sorry, 12.
It's important.
Oh, my apology for skipping it. Okay. British Columbia School Trustee Association Certificates of Recognition.
Yeah.
And that will be presentation.
So the BCSCA wanted to recognize trustees who have had more than one term. And what they have done is they've sent out certificates and pins to each local board and would like that presented to the trustees who have more than one term. So I have some certificates that I'd like to hand out, and I will come around and just announce who's it for and how many terms. So you've got this little pin, and then there's a certificate. So yeah, so I'll so Chair John Kerr has served and is being recognized for 2 terms as a BC trustee. Trustee Richard Franklin is being recognized as a trustee for 2 terms. Trustee Susan Wilson is being recognized as being a BC trustee for 3 terms. Trustee Joyce McMahon is being recognized as being a BC trustee for 4 terms. And trustee Hagan, I think they lost count, so they've given you a lifetime member and. So thank you.
Golden apple, I
Oh,
might
I'm
add.
glad you brought me back in line there. Appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah,
Get the gold apple in there.
Okay, so now we will move on. And we will move on to any other business, and this item will be honoring the September 30th Truth and Reconciliation Day, and we'll ask Vice Chair Eddie to speak to it.
I wanted to have an opportunity to share publicly some of the work that our Indigenous Education Department has done in honoring September 30th as National Truth and Reconciliation Day. First, there's the teddy bear. Isn't he cute? The teddy bear has gone to every school with a book regarding the Spirit Bear, and more importantly, with the calls to action. So what this is this is a locally developed curriculum that helps to educators to speak around truth and reconciliation in a trauma-informed way, to discuss the importance of the history and moving forward, building on that history. And further, each school has received these beautiful books. These were created locally. It was written by Sophia Dick, so I believe that she's from Alert Bay. A lot of people would be familiar with Sophia's name. And it was illustrated by Jessica Chikite and Alex Meritz. And Jessica Chikite is a student of ST 72. She's done some beautiful murals around our school district. She's a young mom who has kids in our system. On the reverse side, the books are created in Quackalock. And then it's further written if you flip the book in English. I just think that they're beautiful. And I just want to acknowledge Deborah Martell in her commitment to helping schools and educators really gain the core knowledge that every member of Canadian society needs around the history in which our country was built. So thank you.
Thank you. Trustee Eddie. Okay, Trustee Hagan.
I want to say that this board and the boards previous to this had worked so hard in trying to be inclusive in our plans. I was honored to be asked to be the first person to sign as board chair the first First Nations agreement in the province, where we challenged the government that together we could, with the band chiefs, start an educational plan where we would challenge the government that we could do better than they were doing. And that was for 2 or 3 years they were willing to go along with it, because we kept on getting more and more money from them because we beat them every time. We bet our budget on it. And, you know, I was just standing on the shoulders of everyone else who realized that this is where we have to go. And this board actually saved the language, along with Daisy Seawood, who got an honorary doctorate degree. And she's the one that started the Quackpala language that is now taught in high schools here. And we've already actually started another language program. And I'm proud of this board. If there's things that I can look back and say, we have gone to the wall to say, and there's so much more to do. Like, I'm not saying we've arrived, but when I look at 30 years ago when I started till now, and I walk down the halls and you've got the drummers beating their drums and graduation programs where they're in their full regalia and it's honored. And I hope we go further, and I hope we can again celebrate this reconciliation that truly has to happen. But I'm glad that this board can say, well, with the small knowledge we had, we started from the beginning, and hopefully as our knowledge and wisdom grows, I think that we can do wonderful things together. And I hope the next board will continue on and step on the shoulders of those that have started work and say, let's do this together.
I would say that this initiative seems to become ingrained as part of the culture of our school district. I think it would be very difficult to turn back and not to continue to go forward. So thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, and the second last item, is there any question? Are there questions from anyone present or out there in TV land or internet land on any agenda items for this meeting?
No questions have come in from online.
Okay, we'll give it a very short period, because probably questions would have come in already. If there's anybody that's last minute question, we'll give them a few seconds more. Well, if anybody has another question, they can send it in and it can be addressed at a later date. So we'll move to the last item. We have a motion to adjourn. Trustee Hagan, seconded by Trustee Eddie. All those in favor? And adjourn.